Greetings and welcome everybody to Speakin' My Piece, hosted by Dekel Bor and presented by Jazz Times. It's good to see you all again. I want to tell you a little bit about the show. Our host, Dekel Bor, has performed with jazz greats Johnny Griffin, Reggie Workman, Pat Martino, Billy Hart, and many more. His recent album, Let Love Rule, is available at dekelbor.bandcamp.com and all streaming services. Today we have another special guest, and I want to read something from. I'm a fan of well-written bios, and I loved this opening. Described by the New York Times as a quote social conscience, multimedia collaborator, system builder, rhapsodist, historical thinker, and multicultural gateway. Of course, they were referring to our guest today, Vijay Iyer. He has released 24 albums. His new record, Uneasy, is out on ECM, and you can find that at Vijay-Iyer, that's IYER.com. He's a teacher at Harvard University in the Department of Music and the Department of African and African American Studies. I was reading through, and I think we're in for a great treat today. This gentleman is not just an active composer and player. He's a collaborator, and he seems to have boundless energy and commitment to furthering not just his craft, but the entire global music community. So with that, I will pass the mic to Berlin and welcome our host, Mr. Dekel Bor. Dekel, how are you?
I'm great. I'm happy to be here. So to anyone who's just joining us, this has been out for a minute. It's been doing incredibly well, mostly thanks to you guys. And we have this tradition in the jazz world where in preparation for the next one, we reach out to our mentors, to our peers, to our heroes, and we seek advice. And in the times of COVID, this series have kind of been the best next thing. So I've been a fan of Vijay's. I remember the first time I've heard this sound. I mean, as much as individualism is celebrated in jazz, you don't hear outrageously unique voices every other day. They come once in a while. And I remember the first time that I heard it and the reaction that I got, this sensation that something really big is happening there. It was on a couple of albums, Code Book with Rudresh and one by Vijay's. I have the visual of the album cover right in front of me, also with Rudresh, and I became a huge fan. And then came a string of trio albums with a good friend, with Marcus playing, and Stephen Crumb, and it was one of the greatest trios of the past 20-something years by far. And I just can't wait to talk about it. So, first of all, Vijay, how are you? I'm so happy to see you.
I'm good. I'm good. It's good to see you.
We've been talking about this for a while.
Thank you for
we're finally doing it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having this series. And
how is everyone doing? The family's okay?
Yeah,
safe?
we're all safe and sound and vaccinated and moisturized. I don't know, everybody's okay. We're in Harlem. Been here the whole time.
How did you spend this whole year? I mean, it was very secluded in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I was teaching online, so there's a bit of that. I was also doing a lot of small composing projects, I guess. I got asked to do little things for mostly classical musicians. So I wrote a few solo piano pieces for different pianists, solo violin piece, solo cello piece, duo for cello and piano, a few things like that. I also wrote a piece. I wrote a little segment for Boston Lyric Opera, which is actually they made an opera miniseries. It's like a televised opera, and it's actually premiering today, I think.
How can I watch it?
I think it's operabox.tv or something like that. Or if you go to Boston Lyric Opera, their website, they'll have some information. And the stuff I wrote is in the third episode, and I think they're launching the first two today. So mine will be next week or something.
Oh, that's amazing. Boston has such a rich history. The orchestra there, the opera there it's really unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah. And this was an interesting one because it all had to be done under pandemic conditions. I mean, I like the idea of, I don't know, just the kind of like trying to birth a new genre, this like basically televised. It's sort of like a prestige miniseries, like, I don't know, like Watchmen or something, but it's an opera. And each episode is just
Recording
like,
in progress.
each episode is just like 8 or 10 minutes. And
How do
yeah.
you go about writing something like this? Do you write at everything in the piano on Sibelius? Like, how do you?
Well, it was, they had a libretto, and in fact, much like one of those, uh, limited series or whatever they're called, like a Netflix show that you would binge watch, they have a whole room full of writers, and like somewhat a different person writes each episode, but it's all sort of coordinated, so there's like a through line and everything. So I was kind of paired with this one librettist, and so then I had to write a song for someone who's actually not an opera singer, who's like more of a kind of cabaret rock kind of singer. So that actually was an interesting challenge, and that gave me enough to work with. It was like, here's these lyrics in the middle of this story, sung by this person, and so then it's
I would
like,
never
you
picture
kind of,
you in a cabaret setting. So that
well,
gets me
it's not. I mean,
all
it's
that more intrigued.
yeah, it's it still sounds like something I would write, but it's sung by someone you might not associate with me, but that's
Well,
okay.
that's fantastic. I think it's kind of been what this year been about in many ways.
Yeah, lots of interesting new challenges and new ways to connect, that I
Absolutely.
hadn't foreseen. So
Absolutely. So I want to talk about this.
hey, you got the vinyl. That's
I
great.
got the vinyl. It just came out. I was the first
sure
one
did.
in.
Yeah, came out on Friday on vinyl. That's
Still
great,
out of
man.
focus. It has the best cover I've seen on an album in ages. I mean, the cover speaks volumes. And I want to hear all about it. I mean, first of all, I mean, how did you guys even go? Was this a process of composing and getting ready to record? Was that like an outlet that you kind of felt that you have to do within pandemic? You couldn't wait a few more months? Was it?
Well,
It kind of seems.
we got lucky because we recorded before the pandemic, and the impetus to record was just that we played together and it felt really good, and we each have histories together. I've worked, as you know, with Tyshawn Sori for 20 years, since he was still in college, and I've worked with Linda in different contexts for at least 10, a lot of different things. And then, through the Banff workshop, which Tyshawn and I have co-directed, and we've been there every year for the last, since 2013. And we bring up guest faculty each year, and Linda has been one of them almost every year. So we've had chances to play together up there many times, but then never really as a trio. We finally had a chance to work together as a trio in 2019. And it just felt like, whoa, this is an interesting new kind of energy, a new feeling.
What is it like to start a new trio after having the same band for so long? I mean,
well, I mean, the thing is that
started playing with you when he was like 11 or something like that.
Marcus started playing with me when he was 16, back in
Right.
2004, 2003, 2004, around then. Well, yeah, it was actually summer of 2003 before he turned 17. He was born in 86. So, yeah, I mean, the thing is that I had worked with both Tyshawn and Marcus for many years. Like I started working with Tyshawn in 2001 and then with Marcus in 2003. And often they both, I'd play with both of them and different. It'd be like one gig with one and one gig with the other. Sometimes they'd split tours or split runs, or they'd sub for each other.
Yeah,
And we even did, even in I remember in 2013, I did a whole trio tour with Tyshawn and Stefan. So it's like we've done lots of, and then there have been times when we all played together, actually, including up at Banff. And there's a video of us all playing together at the Stone. It's pretty great.
Wow.
It's really funny to hear them interact. So I don't know. For me, it's just like we're all in this big family together. You know, that we've been making music together in all these different ways, and we're part of this larger community, larger network of affiliations and collaborations. So it's not like it doesn't feel new, I guess I'll say, to play with Linda and Tyshawn. It did feel special to play in a trio format with them. And that was why I made the album, was because like, oh, this is a feeling that's special, that has like a...
Could you elaborate on that specialness for you?
Yeah, I guess, and you know, as you have so generously described, I mean, I've worked in trio format a lot, and I'm probably best known in this community for those albums, the trio albums I made with Stefan and Marcus. And, you know, Historicity in 2009, the Cello Rondo in 2012, and Break Stuff in 2015. And, you know, those, I still work with both of those guys. In fact, I just made this little, I just made just one song with Marcus today, like yesterday. And then I just mixed it today. It's being mastered right now. So I'm still working with everybody. You know, it's not like that's over, we're starting something new. It was really more like, oh, this is a sound that has its own kind of like, it had this like explosive and electric, like propulsive kind of feeling that, and there was a buoyancy and a kind of brightness to it. So I couldn't really put my finger on what it was, but it was something about how we all related and how certain relationships were kind of magnified in the trio setting, like certain rhythmic relationships in particular. And then, you know, both Linda and Marcus both Linda and Tyshawn, and probably Marcus too, actually, both, I mean, all of these guys, all these folks have like incredible ears. I mean, that's the one kind of constant with all the folks that I've been privileged to work with, is that there's this like unbelievable awareness and like real attunement to what's happening around them. Just incredibly perceptive, and able to relate to whatever's happening, able to make sense of whatever's happening, and able to kind of like extend or expand on whatever someone else does. And so, you know, knowing that, I've always known that about Tyshawn, I've always known that about Marcus, I've always known that about Stefan and Linda. So then like this particular combination with Tyshawn and Linda had all of that in this like kind of propulsive way that was like really, I don't know, it excited me. And I remember when we played those trio sets that year, we did a couple at the Jazz Standard, and then we did one up at Banff for the students. And I just remember it was like, whoa, what was that? What just happened? You know, it was one of those feelings.
Did you bring new music to that, or you played the trio repertoire?
When we made the album, I think when we played the gigs, it was a combination of existing repertoire of mine, but I remember particularly when we did the first trio dates with Linda at the Standard. That was like January of 2019. I decided to like go back and revisit a bunch of older material of mine, just to check out what would happen, you know.
Right.
And that kind of gave us a different landscape, you know, a different perspective, a different set of material, set of like energies to work with and stuff. And, you know, the way I like to put a set together when we're playing, it's all very real time. It's like we start with one thing and then kind of explore it, let it kind of unfold and develop. And then from there, another option kind of reveals itself. It's like, okay, now we're going to play this. So it's a lot of like very real time navigating of the whole archive, I guess. So making this album was kind of like that. Actually, it was like, well, these are all options we have that we'll be able to set off in a different way now. Some of it is material I've done before. Some of it is new that was written that year. So it's a range of things.
So I want to ask about, I'm getting the sense of vast space as a listener, that it kind of started big time with the duo album with Wadada. That I'm being thrown into space as a listener. And I think that's something that's very rare in music, to create space, physical space. And with this album, it's really coming. I feel that way in a very, very big way. Is this something that you're conscious of? You're aware of? Is this intentional, subconscious?
Oh yeah, no, it's always been, for me, the pianists that I always gravitated to were the ones who had that, I guess I'd call it like a composer sensibility, so meaning it wasn't just about displays of virtuosity. It was really like constructive, each idea was structure. It was like setting something up and then letting it resound and then setting something else against it or next to it, or so there was this sort of like progression of ideas in the playing. So it wasn't a lot of like scales and arpeggios kind of stuff, you know what I mean? So I was thinking, I'm talking about Duke Ellington as a pianist, Thelonious Monk as a pianist, Andrew Hill, Randy Weston, Sun Ra, very much Jerry Allen, hugely.
You're playing a Jerry Allen piece on the album.
Yeah. I mean, I've been a fan of hers since the 80s, and then I got to know her in the last, I don't know, 20 years or so. Of her life, and so yeah, she's hugely important to me and very influential as a player on not just me, but I think my whole generation of
Absolutely,
pianists. Yeah.
So another question, I want to know about the process. You guys recorded for one date. I mean, because this album is such a, I kind of said that when I let people know we're doing this, that it seems to me that this is going to be an album that's going to be, we're going to look back on 10 years from now and feeling that it had this seismic effect. Meaning I just have a feeling about it. It's going to have this huge impact.
Wow.
And I want to know about the process. Just as someone who's about to go into the studio. How long do you guys, was there a rehearsal for it? Was it not a rehearsal for it? How long was the sessions? Is it all first takes? I mean, just to get this kind of feeling on record is so difficult and so precious.
Wow.
There's this amazing solo tune in the middle of the album. Let me tell you which one I mean.
Augury, yeah.
And to end with entrustment, that's the whole thing. It's such a special thing to it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I usually, when we go into the studio, I don't have too much of an agenda other than to just get things flowing. Like we're not going to spend too much time listening back to takes, because what I find on, in my own kind of like inner chaos, listening to myself, it just sort of sets all these kind of like self-conscious triggers. I don't know, like I have, so I was asking someone if there's like the sound equivalent of body dysmorphia, because it's like you hear yourself and it sounds so distorted, like it's grotesque or something. Like you don't recognize it, you can't make sense of it. Everything sounds wrong.
I remember I tried to with my girlfriend at the time, she would want to put one of my music on, and I would say it's like looking at yourself naked in the mirror all the time. Imagine that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
how I
yeah.
feel.
I mean, that said, like, you know, well, what I was trying to say is that just like getting takes, um, almost treating it like a gig. We're just playing tunes. We're just going to play. Okay, let's keep going. What's next? Or let's do another one of those. But like not much second guessing or thinking, oh, I messed that up or something like that. Let's just like do it again. Just do. And the funny thing about this session, which this never happened to me, but because everyone's schedules are so crazy, um, the only way I could get them in for 2 days was to have two separate days. So we weren't all just like set up and just go back.
Right.
So we had to not entirely break down, but we had to leave and come back several days later. So then it was almost like um, it wasn't like a run, but it was something like that. It's kind of like when you have a really sparse tour, like, well, there's one date and then a couple of nights off and then another day. So we hadn't rehearsed much, but we had done one gig the previous week in Boston, just kind of as a warm up. And that was like, I'd sent the music in advance, and they're the kind of people who, I mean, Linda and Tyshawn both can just like glance at something and then they know it by heart, or like you can teach them something by ear and they'll remember it forever. It's that kind of thing. So that made it very easy. We could just kind of set up some repertoire, propose some repertoire, and then just experiment with it. And so I think over the course of those 2 days with some space in between, everything had a chance to kind of relax and settle in, and we weren't really trying to prove anything. There were some choices that we made. Like I remember when we were recording Drummer's Song, for example. That's one good example because there's a certain sound that I mean, a lot of people have tried to play that piece, especially in the years since she passed. I mean, there's a lot of like student ensembles that learn that piece and stuff. And in fact, that's when I had to learn it in 2017. She died in June of 2017, and then she had been booked with Esperanza and Terry Lynn to play at Newport in that trio that they had. And what they did instead was Terry invited 3 pianists to kind of pay homage to her. It was me and Jason Moran and Christian Sands. And Terry just sort of like rattled off some repertoire that I should learn. And this was one of those tunes. And I was like, wait, how do you do it as a trio? And then like I found all these different versions. I saw the way she was doing it as a trio. There's a live version from the late 90s. And then there's also the version that's on 21 with Ron Carter and Tony Williams, from the early 90s. They're very different from each other. But then there's the original from 87, which is the one I knew, with Tony Tabal on drums and a bunch of sequencing and stuff. It's like electronics, layers and layers. And so we kind of tried to make an amalgam of all 3 of those. And particularly we did a take, I remember, and Tyshawn listened and said, let's do it again. I'm going to try something else. And he played in that next take, he played more the way Tony Tabal did in the 80s. So I had this kind of like, I guess drummers call it linear style, like more kind of broken up, choppy kind of, and it has this really interesting kind of like surprise to it, the way it lurches. And so I really loved how that worked out. That was one of the few times that we really listened back to see if we had like captured something. I mean, another time was with the piece that ended up opening the album, Children of Flint. And that was mainly, I had just written that tune like a month or so before that. And so we were all kind of learning it, and it has like changes that are kind of involved, you have to figure out how to manage them. And something that happens with us as players is that we become kind of demonstrative about achieving what's hard, and then that becomes like the point. But that doesn't sound like anything to anybody else, like to someone who's not a musician. It doesn't. It just sounds like
But
it sounds like yelling, basically.
Oftentimes with these kind of tunes, though, I get a feeling that if I recorded early on, there will be something fresh on the recording, and then I would get better at playing it. But it wouldn't be as. There would be something primal that is not going to be there.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think we just kind of got to a place where we could treat it with some lightness and some space, like you said, space. Where it's not about connecting all the dots in every chorus. It was actually about some, allowing some mystery and some feeling. Basically allowing some sadness into it. Allowing some something kind of some mourning or something like like I said, mystery or intrigue or understatement. And then also sort of trying to make it feel simple, just trying to find that element of simplicity.
Well, I think it's I kind of find it amazing.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about the last song, Entrustment. And I think that it kind of it closes a very meaningful album in a very meaningful time in a very special way.
Wow, thanks, man. Well, a lot of what I find myself doing in a piano trio context is redoing something, or like doing something that was maybe written for a different situation, a different ensemble, a different sound. So then when I approach it, like the thematic material, for example, it's sort of like it's the sound of me remembering it, more than actually delivering it or hammering it out, So that was the case with this. This piece comes from this suite I made for a string orchestra with members of Silk Road Ensemble, like basically a pipa, a tabla, and a clarinet, So these two very non-Western instruments, and then one lyrical instrument that kind of moves between different sound worlds. But it was all kind of like related to this Buddhist text, and this I made this trip to central China, to like the Gobi, the end of the Great Wall of China. It's in the Gobi Desert. It's like there's nothing there except there's this town there called Dunhuang, which was an oasis at some point. And so because of that, when there was in the days of the Silk Road, this would be a stop. This would be like a destination, because it became a city, for millennia. It was different. It was home to very different populations.
What was your impetus or reason to go? I mean, that far?
I was invited to go there by this theater director named Peter Sellers, who's been interested in working with some of those materials. There's this like network of cave temples that have been painted incredibly, just like stunningly gorgeous works of art, some of the greatest works of art on the planet, actually. And there's several hundred of them there. So we got to visit a whole bunch of them. It just totally changed my life, But then to think like
you and Peter Sellers went together on a trip?
Yeah, he brought a whole bunch of artists, including Julie Meritu, the painter, and Anish Kapoor, and a bunch of folks, just to kind of go check this out and be amazed, essentially. And so then I was like thinking about the fact that there is this incredible, monument, essentially like this spiritual monument in the middle of the desert that you basically have to make a pilgrimage to.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then thinking about all that entails, and what it means to be a worshipful and kind of to be humbled in front of something like that, So that's basically what that's about. That piece is about. It's a sort of meditation, and it's very simple the way it's constructed. It's
Did
just
that
moves back.
work with Sellers ever? I mean, I'd love to hear that. I'm a huge fan of his from all the John Adams collaborations and
Yes,
many,
yeah.
many others. I mean, he's like a
Um,
giant.
yeah, we are trying to work towards something in the next couple of years. So it's still cooking. But
Mm.
this little thing I wrote as a sort of set, almost like an etude for myself to sort of like work through some ideas. And then this piece in particular was just the closing kind of almost like a processional or a hymn or something to end to just to gently sort of imagine the infinite or something like that. But it's got a very simple structure. It just moves between these two chords, and there's a melody, but it's kind of hinted at more than played. And then it's just about what we do with it. It's just a path to walk on together.
It's just absolutely beautiful. I have to ask you this. I have a feeling that the title and the subjects at hand not only refer to the year of COVID, but to a far greater sense of um, I don't want to say struggle, but adversity. It could be racial, it could be spiritual, it could be that I'm sensing that a big theme of the times that we're living at.
Hmm.
And did that have any resonance with you, or?
Yes, I would say so, in the sense that I don't know, that all of that has influenced me as a creative person as long as I've been making music. Some of it was about like finding my place in the world as an artist of color in the US in particular, and of like child of more recent immigrants. So it meant that I was a member of this sort of new population in the US, one that was not recognized or not initially even seen or acknowledged. Um, and then also trying to come to terms with the history of this music that was created by Black people in American cities in the context of struggle and in the context of injustice. So there's that history of defiance and that history of, just tragedy and overcoming tragedy, and still meeting moments of tragedy, no matter, even throughout this, the history of this music is incredible and incredibly uplifting, but it's also characterized by being born in circumstances of oppression. So how does any of us who hasn't lived that make sense of that? That's the kind of question for me, coming into this musical culture and coming into, being mentored by a lot of elder African American musicians, and continuing to collaborate with many of them. And it's sort of like, how do you honor that legacy and support people who are in that continued struggle? And so those have been like burning questions for me all this time that I've been making music.
What are some of the conclusions?
Conclusions.
I mean, there has to be.
Does it conclude? Well, this is the thing. So I was actually, the filmmaker Barry Jenkins,
Yeah.
who, he made Moonlight, and most recently this show that, the Amazon series of the Underground Railroad, that, adapting the novel by Colson Whitehead. There's an interview with him. He was partly talking about like last year, because one thing that happened in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and the incredible, beautiful, like uprising of waves of protest, not just in the US, but around the world. but then like the way people would respond with this, like, particularly non-Black people would say things like, oh, I feel so bad about everything that's going on right now. That was this kind of like weird way of encapsulating the fact that police kill, carry out these extrajudicial killings of Black people in particular. And that would be encapsulated by this phrase, everything that's going on right now. And so Barry Jenkins in this interview, he says, well, when people say everything that's going on right now, they don't realize that it's always been going on. That's the thing.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that's like, so then all that's
Absolutely.
happening is that
It's not a new, absolutely.
there happens to be someone with a cell phone camera documenting it now and then that happens to see the light of day now and then. But all of that has always been there. In fact, it's probably been worse in the past.
I think there's something about the jazz community that we're always been collaborating regardless of color, almost to the beginning of the music, to various degrees, but I always felt that within the jazz community, it wasn't that it was not a non-issue, but it wasn't a separating issue. It was an issue to talk about around the table. And I always found that incredible, because it was, as soon as you left a gig, or as soon as you left whatever, it was that reality changed, in my feeling. And in addition to that, I always felt that us musicians, since we're such students of history in a way, I mean, to learn this music, you have to learn American culture and its history. And it's the stories you would hear from the musicians themselves, or from the mentors, or from reading books about musicians from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. It's almost insane. I mean, it almost sounds like fiction, especially with the morphing of or with the arrival of music education in jazz. It seems like the people that go there, you kind of have to have the money to go there in many ways. And so I guess what I'm going at is that I think the reality was just so harsh. The daily reality for all of our heroes and all the people that we listen to or we learn from, or I think we were talking about it with some rope-a-dope guys just the other day. I mean, in a way, a lot of the beauty of this music came from such grim circumstances. And that is something that I don't think is talked about a lot today, honestly.
Well, when you hear it in those terms, then the imagination that you hear at work in Coltrane or in Monk or in Duke Ellington or in Art Ensemble of Chicago or Alice Coltrane or Jerry Allen, that imagination is a radical one. It's radical in the sense that it's imagining a different world. It's imagining a better world. It's imagining a very different future, and so it's like transformative in that sense. So it's more than just making changes. It's actually about making change. And that to me is like, that's how I hear the entire history. And it's not even whether someone says they're political or not. It's actually like understanding those circumstances in detail, knowing how it plays out day after day for people, and still does. It's not just in the past. So yeah, like I think anybody who is not Black, which includes both of us, who finds themselves somewhere in the vicinity of this music and culture that's called jazz, has to reckon with this, has to reckon with like, what is your relationship to that ghastly history, and to that, also to that radical imagination, that radical intent to change the world that you hear at the heart of this music. So that's kind of like, I don't know, I guess I've tried to make sense of that for myself. And some of it has been about like, I've had the chance to collaborate with activists in different moments. I got to play in Amiri Baraka's band for several years. And we did like all these political events, and he was an incredible performer because he had this sense of how to communicate, I worked in the 90s in this group called African Roots of Jazz that was led by this drummer named E.W. Wainwright. And we used to play in the California state prisons. That was our main gig, was like to go play at San Quentin or wherever, like all over the state, actually.
What were those gigs like? I mean, what kind of material, how did the audience react?
Well, the band leader and his partner, they had a kind of, it was sort of Afrocentric review, I would say, like in the sense that we would do music that spanned the 20th century and spanned the globe, but it was all a sort of like Pan-African repertoire. So we did some like Hugh Masekela, and we did a lot of McCoy Tyner, and we did like Miriam Makeba, and some soul tunes, Oscar Brown, and things like that. So, but then like, what were the audiences like? Well, first of all, they were all ages. It was like 18 to 90 or whatever. Like really, there were lifers in there, and there were also kids who had just been put in for possession or something like that, usually. And so, like he used to call them political prisoners, because that's basically, the fact was that they were 95 to 98% African American, and so quite a few Latinx folks too. And so that made it clear that this is like this racialized process of warehousing human beings, and throwing human lives away. It was
yeah.
But it also was like very intensely policed. Like there's literally like in the maximum security ward, if you're walking down the sidewalk, there's literally a line on the sidewalk, and if you cross it, there's a sniper who's got a rifle pointed at you, like, and if you cross it, then that's grounds for them to shoot you. So it's really like, it's insane, it's this, I mean, if you're tuned into the abolitionist movement of today, which is like, this is a new abolitionist movement, which is about abolishing prisons and abolishing police, in fact, there's this book right here that I recommend, though you can't really, there, can you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like a very good introduction to the topic. But like, when you've seen the insides of these spaces and the way that they treat people, you can't not think that there's something wrong with it, The audiences themselves, these guys were like, they were the best audiences I've ever had, in the sense that they were so grateful. And it's partly because no one was giving them anything. And so to come and give them something, it was just immense gratitude, and a real deep sense of connection with them. So.
I used to go and do gigs voluntarily in shelters for Army veterans, people but those that are kind of like that live there,
mm-hmm.
And I would have the same sensation that they're incredibly grateful, and no one ever comes to visit, in a way.
Mm.
I mean, it seems like society has a way of discarding these problems as opposed to really kind of dealing with them.
Yeah, and there's like this, this systemic defunding of any kind of opportunities for people in prison. So like one thing that was happening in the 90s when I was doing that was that they were defunding the program that brought us in, so they were taking away libraries and they were taking away even gym equipment and stuff like that. So then it just, it's just like system, it's organized cruelty is what it is. It's organized, just inhumane cruelty. So this is the thing, like, especially when you think about the history of these systems, police and prisons, and particularly that they in themselves are anti-Black institutions. They are institutions that are founded primarily to contain and control Black populations in the US. So what can be, this is the thing, like, I don't know, I guess I feel like any artist today has to come to terms with that. Like, what are you in relation to that? And so this is like, I don't know, it's been what's...
I absolutely agree with you. And even more so if you're playing jazz music.
Yeah, I mean, there's all this like rhetoric about freedom and democracy and stuff like this that gets thrown around in relation to jazz, but then like here we are sitting by while people are warehoused, put in cages, treated in these inhumane ways on our dime, So I don't know. I mean, not to... This isn't what you came here to talk about. But you asked me like what
well, I
is
think
there some kind of like political
uneasy is
framework
just the right word to use it.
Right, exactly. I mean, that was kind of what I was trying to get at, is that it's uneasily easy to make a record and put it out and be psyched about it, right? Especially now, like what was magnified in this pandemic is inequality, is like the differential impact of the same circumstances on different people, on different populations, and to see that, like, most of the people who died were Black and brown people in the US.
Yeah.
About
3-4 weeks ago, when news were coming out of India to what was happening with the pandemic there, I mean, it was just, to me, it was kind of beyond insane. It just, you could see that I just started, I don't know if I told you this, but I just sent all of my income from my album going back to a year ago, and for next year I sent to like 2 organizations there, because it was literally, it was very clear that if you don't send money now, people are dying now. It's, I mean, by the second.
Yeah.
And it, because of how big the country is, the number was just, I mean, it was just like, it was one of those moments where I really felt like, if you're not acting right now, you're letting people die.
Yeah. This is what this year has kind of taught us. I think, like, anyone who's privileged enough to have made it through, to like actually bear witness to the vast scale of human suffering that we all somehow, if we in the, of privilege in the West, who are like privileged enough to have homes and to be able to travel and to make a living and things like that, basic stuff, to bear witness to the unimaginable scale of inequality and suffering, and then like, what is it to be an artist in the face of that? I guess, again, like, this is the sort of question that I just feel that we all have to keep asking ourselves.
I totally agree. I always take the easy way out of optimism, in a way.
Yeah, well, this is
honest.
There's that saying, is it Antonio Gramsci, or that phrase, which is pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will, right? So there's like, we know what's wrong, and yet we still make music. We still make things for tomorrow. We still believe in the power of human connection. We still believe in the power of art. And so there's that tension is where we live, right? It's like, that tension of like knowing what's wrong with the world, but also wanting to try to help in some small way, or wanting to try to fix something, or wanting to try to make people feel something, like share feelings through art, this kind of thing. So that is always an optimistic act, to make an album and put it out, or to make music for people, to share music in some way. That's always optimism. And so there's no way around it, as music makers. That's what that means. Is that we believe that whatever I feel, someone else will also feel it.
Well, I definitely feel this. So anyone who's joining us, this is the, this is the album to get right now. I will say that it sounds so much more incredible on vinyl than it did on my digital platforms. It just sounds so much better.
I have to agree. I do.
And
It's pretty amazing to be. I mean, I grew up like, I remember when I was a teenager in the 80s, getting vinyl LPs out of the library, the local library, and often quite a few ECM titles.
Which ones were? I prepared some albums I want to talk to you about. We'll save it for the next one. I mean, I have some. We always do this. I have some albums here. Some other albums.
Yeah, I know all of those. Those are, yeah.
I know you know. I chose them just for you.
Hey, Black Fire.
And this I thought was a big one.
Yeah.
Because
that's the one with Blakey and Al McKibben.
Yeah.
That's great. That has that version of Little Rudy Tooty that they then orchestrated later. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, but I think.
What else did you have there? Real McCoy. You had Black Fire.
But I always get a sense, as far as Monk, that the impact on you was he has a way of developing ideas in the most. It's completely logical and completely surprising at the same time, and he doesn't let go of an idea until he let it bloom in a way. And that I think, because when people talk about Monk or McCoy, usually people mimic the language, which is obviously the wrong way to go about it. And you have a very deep way of connecting with them. That's, you play your own language, but there's a connection still.
Wow, that's thank you. That's really, no one's ever said it like that before. That I appreciate that. And I think the thing about it is that when you are in the moment with sound, the way that Monk was, an idea is also an action, right? And so so it's about like that unity of thought and action. That it's not just some kind of mental game. It's also a dance. It's also very physical. It's very, it's like deep sensation, It gets your ears ringing. It makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. It gets your whole body moving. And then it's also communal in the sense that it's got this like ritual feeling to it, that we're all in it together in this kind of like vortex of rhythm. And that can kind of carry us somewhere. So all of those things together, I think, there is like the content in terms of like nuts and bolts of how you put these sounds together and whatever, and the phrases and so on. But there's also the sense that it needs to fly. It needs to fly in the world. It needs to be set free. Ideas need to be set free. That's basically what it is. And what it means is they need to be given to other people. You have to really like radiate that sensibility. And that's how I connect with Monk, in the way that he connected with everybody sonically. He really delivered it to you. He really got it across and got it into your body so that you'd feel it too. And you'd find yourself feeling what he felt. And, yeah.
I always get a sense that this wasn't a difficult thing for him to do. I always get a feeling this is just supernatural for him.
Well, he did work. I mean, he did work at it, and he made stuff that was hard, and he had to like kind of work at it. You could hear him searching, like, and then like every sound that he discovers is like this this jewel, you know, this
Absolutely.
so, and he had years of struggle too. Like it wasn't an easy road for him, you know. So
There's
think
this
you hear that
story
too.
that we played a week at the Vanguard and there were 3 people there. I mean, literally 3 people.
Oh, in the very beginning,
Yeah.
when they first booked him, yeah, I believe that. Yeah, it's not easy to break in, as they say. But he went from there to the cover of Time magazine. That's
Exactly. I was just gonna say that. Exactly.
Yeah.
So Vijay, what's next musically for you?
I have other composer commissions. I'm writing a clarinet quintet for clarinet and string quartet.
That's a lot of writing. Wow.
And then a cello concerto, which is that's like 2 years off. So things like that.
How do you go about these things? Do you just sit at the piano with the music and you just put in the time? I mean, I'm recording an album of Bach right now, and it's taking insane amount of time. Insane.
Yeah,
And
it does take time.
and imagine to write music that is that, it's like writing a book. It's like writing a novel. There's just so much, it's that demanding.
Right, and it's even stranger in the sense that at least if you're writing a book, then there's a plot and there are characters, and you're like, what do you want these characters? What do you want to happen to these characters? You know, and so then, but when you're writing music, it's like, actually, this needs to go before that, but it's not, you know, so it's not about cause and effect in that way. It's like, it's a very different sense of what belongs where in the structure. You know, I think like, I find it's not that different from making an album in the sense that there's like the time that you're inside of it where it's a lot of like pieces and you don't know what's what kind of. And then there's a time you're trying to get outside of it, to try to see it from the outside, to get a sense of like the overview. What is this doing in the world? What will this do? You know, not what's in it, but what does it do? What does it do in the world? What impact will it have? What effect will it have on a listener? What kind of experience is it for somebody who's not me, who doesn't know anything about it? You know, that is the hardest thing for me, is crossing that threshold from inside to outside, to like find it, to getting a perspective on what is this whole thing that we've made. And that's probably the part that takes the longest for me, because that's when I start thinking, oh, well, actually, this doesn't need to go here, or this is too long, or this isn't long enough, you know, or having said that, I don't need to say this, you know, this kind of stuff, like that real overview sensibility. That's the composer's perspective, you know, which is not just stringing notes together. It's about like constructing a whole experience.
That's, wow, I can't wait to hear it.
Well, neither can I. It's going to take a while, though. I can wait to write it, but I can't wait to hear it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like,
you have your work cut out for you.
They're good problems to have. They're good challenges.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Vijay,
there's a few other things too, like we're doing a big show at Prospect Park in Brooklyn in August. That'll be like the first major New York show since the pandemic.
With the trio?
Trio plus some special guests. And Linda is still in Australia, so it won't be Linda. And then we're doing, there'll be some trio tours in the fall and spring and stuff. So
great. I'll definitely make it one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, we hope to. I think we're coming to Berlin in November. So
great, fantastic. Vijay, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been such a revelation to speak to you.
Man, likewise. Thank you for having me. Thanks a lot. Good to reconnect after all these years.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
And I'll see you real soon. Stay safe.
Okay, you too.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.